This is going to be a pretty quick lesson about something called interval notation. It's basically just a different way to write inequalities, which sometimes is a bit more of a pain, but most of the time is actually easier. So let's just start real quick with this example here. This is an inequality graphed on a number line. -2 is where you start. You go on forever in this direction. So just remember the difference between a closed dot here versus an open dot. Closed means you can actually use -2. If this were an open circle, you couldn't actually use it. So inequality-wise, you'd start at -2 and go on forever. So you'd say, well, x is greater than or equal to -2, and again, if this was an open circle, you wouldn't have the bar here for the or equal to. In intervals, the idea is you're trying to express the value of x between two different things. So obviously the leftmost possibility is -2, and then any value in this region it works as well. It goes on forever. So between what two numbers is our shaded area? Well, between -2 and infinity. So -2 comma infinity is how you write the between. And then there's two different symbols you can use that cap off the outside of here. It's either going to be a parenthesis or a bracket. A parenthesis means less than and greater than. It's not or equal to. A bracket means less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. So in this situation, since it's a closed circle, we'll say, well, put a bracket there. We also need to put something on the infinity side. You can never actually land on infinity, so you'll never have a bracket on infinity. This is always just going to be a parenthesis here to say what we're going towards. Now, like I said, this is actually easier in this case, right? Inequalities. This one is more of a pain, but most of them you'll actually see is way faster to write in this format, and we'll try a couple more in the next slide that you'll see like that. So in this case, we have any compound inequalities between two things. Essentially, it's going to the right of -1, so x is greater than -1. It's also stopping at 3, so x is less than or equal to 3. You can write that with a big and in between here. Larger than -1 and smaller than or equal to 3. That would get you this whole region inside of here. A compound inequality would be written a little bit faster in this format. So you could write it as -1 less than x, which is less than or equal to 3. That's the fastest way to write it inequality-wise. If we go down to the intervals next, it's the same idea as what we saw on the previous slide. You would say, well, -1 is my starting point, 3 is where I stop. I can't actually use -1 as an open circle, so I put a parenthesis there. I can use 3, so I'll put a bracket there. So already you're saying this is a little bit less work. Now, what if we had a little more to this, where we had something like this added into the mix? You still have this one, but you also have that. If you had that in this case, you'd have to actually write it all out. So you'd say, well, -5 less than or equal to x, which is less than -3, or it could be all of this. That's one long chain of inequalities, and we'll see a lot of examples like this throughout the year. So this would be a lot more to write. Let's try to express this in intervals and see if it's a little bit easier. So same idea, we do need to write a separate group here from -5 to -3. So bracket here for -5, parenthesis -3, and then the only question is what goes in between here. We have this group or that group. We put this union symbol, which means we're essentially attaching these to each other. Either this is our answer or that's our answer. So you can see it's a little less writing, and it's a little less work to not have to use the inequality symbols. You just write it's between these two numbers, and you can put brackets or parentheses. Let's do a few more examples, and then that'll be it for this. So just one more here where we have this or that. We're either less than or equal to -3, or we are greater than 1. In intervals, you could say, well, -infinity up to -3 with a bracket there, union 1 and beyond. So you would say it's either this group or it's that group. The final one here, this one's similar to that part up here. In inequalities, it'd be less than -1. This group's a compound, so 2 less than or equal to x, less than or equal to 4. And you'd say it's less than -1 or it's this group. If you put that in intervals now, you'd say, well, this is -infinity up to -1 with a parenthesis, union, this should be a bracket, 2 to 4 with a bracket there as well. So we're going to use this type of notation the entire year. We'll rarely ever use inequalities other than just in the intermediate steps. So just kind of get used to writing in this format.